I'm Glenn Campbell with a superficial guide to Iceland and the Faroe Islands. I visited Iceland in 2012 and 2015, and I visited the Faroe Islands in 2018, and these are my impressions. But first, let me give you the broad overview. I am driving in the Mojave Desert of California, so everything I tell you about Iceland and the Faroe Islands is coming straight from memory without any research, and I'm bound to make some mistakes. The aim of superficial guides is to give you a broad overview, so the details really shouldn't matter. But you should also check the description on the YouTube version of this podcast for any errors that I may have made in my download. So this is the second episode in the Kilroy Café podcast, but it is the third installment in my superficial guides. And the idea behind my superficial guides is I just want to give you the overall impression of a place, the most important things to see, and whether or not you should visit that place at all. Because if you look up information on the internet or in tourist guides, you are just deluged with information, just too much information. And I'm trying to be, instead of giving you a lot of details, I'm trying to be superficial, meaning that I'm just giving you the highlights. It's not that I don't know a place. I know the place pretty well, but I'm trying to draw back to a global perspective, comparing this place to all the other places you could visit. I am traveling as a budget traveler. I'm not staying at the Hilton. I'm very limited on money, so that is the angle that I'm coming at these places with. What can you see with very limited resources? And when you talk about both Iceland and the Faroe Islands, these are very expensive places. These are part of Scandinavia, where you can expect prices overall to be roughly twice what they are in the United States for things like lodging and food. Between 50% higher and twice to 100% higher for most of the things you need as a tourist. So let's dive into Iceland. Iceland is a big old island it's a big young island in the North Atlantic. It's about at the same, it's just south of the Arctic Circle. So it's roughly equivalent in latitude as Alaska, being just south of the Arctic Circle, but it is relatively warm. It is a very green island with relatively moderate temperatures, because they are buffered by the Gulf Stream bringing warm water up from the south. So Iceland, generally speaking, is a mild place. It doesn't get too hot in the summer. It doesn't get too frightfully cold in the winter, although it will be cold. This is Scandinavia. But you can visit. I would say you can visit from the spring through the fall. I wouldn't visit in the winter. It's just too dark, too closed down. In the winter time, you would have only a few hours of touring every day. You'd just be seeing the snow on the roadside is all you're going to see. Now, you do see in the wintertime the aurora borealis, the northern lights. Iceland is a very good place for that. But you don't need to be in the dark of winter to do that. You can be on the shoulder season. In my experience, you're going to see the aurora whenever it's dark. Whenever it's dark and cloudless, you're going to see the aurora. And what the aurora looks like is, first of all, you think it's clouds, but then after you watch it for a while, you realize that these clouds are really fast moving. They also tend to be greenish in hue. So if you didn't know what aurora was, you just kind of blow it off and think it's clouds. But once you do know, then you're going to stop and you're going to watch it for a few minutes. A few minutes is all it really deserves, because once you know what the aurora does and how it looks, you don't need to see it every night. It's a repetitive thing. It's not really worth the tour in my mind in itself. But if you want to see the aurora, you're going to see it. You have to have some darkness, and in the middle of the summer in June, you're not going to have very much darkness in Iceland. It's close to the Arctic Circle, pretty much 24 hours of light, and there's no opportunity to see the aurora because it's not dark, as opposed to going, let's say, in October, when the weather is still fairly mild, but you still have something like 12 hours of darkness in which to watch the aurora. So let's talk about the basic logistics of Iceland. All the flights come into one airport called Keflavik, which is out in the middle of nowhere, actually about, I think, 45 minutes to an hour from the capital city itself, Reykjavik. And all roads lead to Reykjavik. It's the only place where people actually live. I think 2/3 of the population live in Reykjavik, or more than that, actually. It's a typical Scandinavian city, blockish houses that are very well insulated, and everything is new. You'll find this throughout Iceland. All the buildings are new. It seems like everything in Iceland was built within the past 50 years. Frankly, there's not a lot of history in Iceland. You don't go there for the historic sites, because for the most part there aren't any. All you have for historic sites is some stone foundations, perhaps, because the Vikings built their buildings of sod and wood, and all of that has gone away, has been absorbed into the landscape. So everything you'll see in Iceland is new. I'd say built within the past 50 years. And the only other attractions you have are various forms and expressions of volcanism. You have volcanoes, you have lava fields, you have waterfalls flowing over the lava fields, and that's all you have in Iceland. The various ways that volcanic activity has shaped the landscape. Let's back up now to the logistics of how you should see Iceland, and really there's only one practical way to see Iceland, and that is to rent a car. You can take tours of Iceland. You could come in on a bus, take a bus from the airport, stay at a hotel, and take a bus tour of Iceland, but that's not nearly as satisfying as being free in a rental car to stop where and when you wish. So if you don't have the ability to rent a car, don't come to Iceland. If you're a student and aren't old enough yet to rent a car, I say don't come to Iceland until you're 25 or so, because then you can rent a car and you can see what there is to see, and it will be satisfying to you. If you come without a car, not prepared to rent a car, I think Iceland is going to be a bust for you. So how long do you need in Iceland? And the answer is 3 days. The whole country, 3 days. You can come for a week, and I have done that, but you're not going to see much more in a week than you could have seen in 3 days. And I'm talking about 3 touring days. I'll give you an itinerary a little bit later. What's the first thing you notice in Iceland? Well, the first thing you notice are all the lava fields. And the lava fields are green because they are covered with thick moss. It's a weird extraterrestrial landscape. And there are virtually no trees. No trees anywhere in Iceland except where they've been deliberately planted. And this was the biggest surprise to me, because Iceland is a temperate climate. It's not much different from Norway. And Norway has tons of trees. So why aren't there any trees in Iceland? The best explanation that I can come up with is that the Vikings cut them all down, that there were trees here 500 years ago, but the Vikings cut them all down for firewood and for building material, and there's none of them left, which is kind of weird because you'd think they'd grow back by now. So where do you stay in Iceland? And the only real option is Reykjavik, the capital city. And when I first went to Reykjavik in 2012, there weren't many options. There were only 1 or 2 hostels, and all the other lodging was very expensive. When I returned in 2015, there were many more options. There were a number of hostels, and the lodging prices had come way down. Now, I'm recording this during the pandemic, and I have no idea what the pandemic is going to do to the Iceland economy or to tourism in Iceland. So we have that caveat. But it's a good bet that the only realistic place to stay affordably is going to be in Reykjavik. That is, if you need a bed to sleep in. I do not need a bed to sleep in. If I have a rental car, I know how to sleep in a rental car and do it comfortably. I have another video, which I will put in the description for the YouTube version of this podcast, on how to sleep in a rental car. And I filmed that video in Arctic Norway. So look for my video, How to Sleep in a Rental Car. But basically, you've got to bring all your stuff with you. If you do it in the summer, temperature's going to be mild, and you probably can bring a medium-duty sleeping bag. And if you're practiced in sleeping in a rental car, there's plenty of places to do it. You just pull off to the side of the road someplace, pull off onto a small side road, and you can get away with sleeping pretty much anywhere. Providers in Reykjavik or at the airport will rent you campers, these tiny little campers. If you think you need that, I think the price is something like $100 a day for a compact camper. I don't feel that I need that, but that may work for many people, especially if you're traveling as a couple with two people traveling. So the lodging options are stay in Reykjavik and do a couple of day trips out of Reykjavik, or have a vehicle to travel in that which case you can start and end in Reykjavik and spend a couple of days, couple of nights in the vehicle out in the boonies. So what do you see in Iceland? And there are 3 things. You can see what's called the Golden Circle, which is the 3 main tourist attractions in Iceland. They are the Gullfoss, the Gold Falls, the Gullfoss, absolutely huge waterfall. There are the geysers, which our name for geyser came from. And there is Thingvellir, a national park where there is some historic interest. It was a place of assembly, and there's this rugged canyon cut into the hillside. Oh, and there's a gazillion waterfalls, so lots of waterfalls along the way between these 3 attractions. So this Golden Circle can be done in a single one-day trip. It's about 200 miles, I guess 350 kilometers, that can all be done in a single driving tour out of Reykjavik. You start very early in the morning, and you can have enough time to see everything by the time you get back to your hotel. The second thing you can see is Reykjavik itself. There's not a lot to say about it. All the buildings are new. The main tourist attraction in Reykjavik is that modernistic church in the middle of town. you can climb to the top of it and get a good view of the whole town. Another place to get a good view of the whole town is the top of some hot water tanks in the hills above Reykjavik. It's quite obvious when you get there where these tanks are. I think that viewpoint is free. And the third thing you would do, let's say you have 3 driving days, you have 3 touring days in Iceland. The third thing you would do is take a very long day trip out to some glaciers. And there's a place where glaciers calve into a lake, forming icebergs. And the icebergs form a progression out of the lake and into the outer ocean. And I don't remember the name of that place, but it's on the south coast. And if I did remember the name of the place, I wouldn't be able to pronounce it. So as I recall, it's something like a 3 or 4 hour drive from Reykjavik to get to this place on the south coast and see icebergs close up and actually walk up to the face of a glacier and see icebergs up close, either beached. You can sit upon a small glacier, a small iceberg if you choose to. And that's all you do. That's 3 days. You've seen all the main highlights of Iceland in 3 days. So that's 3 touring days, which would be 4 nights in Iceland. Come in on day 0, have 1, 2, 3 days, and then fly out on the 4th day. And you've seen Iceland. I don't think you can stay longer, and I have. And you can see more waterfalls and more glaciers, and hike in more lava fields. But you won't see much more that's different than what you've seen on your first tour, on your 3-day tour. So I did that. I did the 3-day tour in 2012. I came back in 2015. And in 2015, I did the full 7-day ring road. I drove the entire ring road around the entire island. And I don't think I got too much more out of it than I got from the 3-day tour. When I took my longer tour, the attractions are more subtle. I enjoy stopping along the way and talking to the horses. Iceland has a unique breed of horse, the Icelandic horse, which is a very small horse. It's really more like a pony. And they're very friendly and they're very feisty, and they want to talk to you. They usually are willing to talk to you, and they're always jousting with each other. I have a lot of this recorded on my own Instagram. If you'd like to see my Instagram posts from Iceland, you can check out my hashtag for it, which is GPC Iceland. That's all one word, GPC, Glenn Paul Campbell Iceland. GPC Iceland is the hashtag to see all my views of Iceland on Instagram. Now, that's all I can think of for Iceland. Oh, Iceland has, apart from its glaciers and waterfalls and geysers, Iceland has something called the Blue Lagoon, which is an artificially created tourist attraction of blue water, blue hot thermal water that people swim in. And this is considered the premier commercial tourist attraction. I'm not impressed, and I made a video about how unimpressed I was. I was not going to pay the huge sum you have to pay to go in and swim in these hot springs, but you can still go there and park there for free and go to the visitor center where you can see the thermal pools, and you can walk around some of these thermal pools, take some pictures that are just as satisfying as having swum in the thermal pools, and it costs you nothing. And that's about halfway between the airport and Reykjavik. So those are all of the attractions. Other attractions include a geothermal plant with a visitor center. You can drive around the thermal fields for free, but if you want to go into the visitor center, that costs money, and as I recall, it was quite pricey. So the main thing to do in Iceland is drive around, see the waterfalls, see the main tourist attractions. Maybe you can find some lava tubes, and that's it. There's no history. The only history you'll find in Iceland will be plaques along the side of the road that tell you what was once here, but there's rarely any trace of what was there. Only the plaques to satisfy you. You go there for the natural, exotic, volcanic activity. You don't go there for culture because there isn't any. So that's Iceland. Let's move on to the Faroe Islands. And I have a very superficial view of the Faroe Islands because I was only there for about 3 days and I was very sick. I had at the time undiagnosed cancer and I was very weak. I certainly couldn't take any hikes. I could hardly walk a kilometer. So I just have a very rough impression of the main points of the Faroe Islands. The Faroe Islands are located about halfway between Iceland and Scotland. They are, as I recall, they are not volcanic. So the terrain is a little different, but there are virtually no trees in the Faroe Islands. It's quite a number of islands connected by a good road and ferry system, and they have an excellent bus system, or at least they did in the pre-pandemic era. And this turns out to be an excellent resource. The bus fares, like everything else in the Faroe Islands, are very expensive if you pay for each bus. But at the airport, you can buy a tourist pass for the whole bus system for a very reasonable price. At least pre-pandemic, at the tourist office there, you can buy you can buy this bus pass, let's say for 3 days, and you can see a great deal of the island chain on these buses. This pass is good for the buses, and it's good for the ferries between the islands. So the first thing you use your bus pass for is to take the bus into the capital city, and really the only city on the Faroe Islands, which is Tórshavn. There are hotel options in Tórshavn, which I could not afford, but at the time I visited, there was a hostel halfway between the airport and Tórshavn for about the bargain price of about $40 a night. So the best way to see the Faroe Islands would be to rent a car if you can afford it. I'm sure it's very expensive, and they probably have a kilometer charge tacked onto it. But that's the best way to go. Do not go to the Faroe Islands until you've been to Iceland. Once you have thoroughly absorbed Iceland, there's just so much more to do in Iceland than there is in the Faroe Islands that you definitely want to go to Iceland first. Once you have Iceland out of your system and you've seen all the rest of Europe, then you can consider these out-of-the-way places like the Faroe Islands. I mean, don't go to the Faroe Islands if you can go to Switzerland instead, or virtually any place else in Europe instead, because you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck by seeing the rest of Europe first. London, Paris, Rome. If you're into natural beauty, you're going to get much more dramatic landscape in Iceland and in the fjords of Norway. So Faroe Islands has its fjords, but they're very mild. This is a very relatively mild terrain. It's mountainous, but not mountainous like Norway is. So see the coast of Norway before you bother with the Faroe Islands. The access to Faroe Islands would be through Copenhagen. In the summertime in 2015, there was also a flight from the Faroe Islands to Scotland that I took, but most of the flights come and go from Copenhagen. Faroe Islands is a possession of Denmark, and the one city, Tórshavn, really looks a lot like a Danish city or a Norwegian city. So everyone should go to Iceland. Iceland is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You only need to go for 3 days, but there's a landscape there that you won't find anywhere else in the world, and it's an otherworldly landscape, and it's probably the only place you're going to be able to see icebergs and glaciers up close. So every well-traveled person should go to Iceland. Not everyone needs to go to the Faroe Islands. Admittedly, I didn't see much of it because I was so sick, but what I did see didn't impress me enough for me to want to go back when I'm in perfect health. So this has been the third installment in my superficial guides. In future guides, I hope to cover all the rest of Europe. And I'm thinking about how I should divide it. I've already talked about all of Eastern Europe, which is all the countries that were once communist. And I gave you an overview of each of those countries. And I'm trying to figure out how to divide up Western Europe. And I'm thinking of doing a Northern European podcast and a Southern European podcast, and perhaps a special one just for Britain in future. But we'll see how I divide this up. So I want to give you the whole picture of all of Europe, and then you can decide where in Europe you want to go. If you're coming from, let's say, North America or someplace else in the world, where should you go in Europe? And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert here. I'm going to spoil some of it by telling you, go to London, Paris, Rome. These are the first places you should hit if you go to Europe. But I'll give you more about that in future podcasts.